A worn-out Carhartt jacket hung from Marcus Beaulieu's shoulders like it had given up trying to look presentable years ago. Its collar was frayed, the left pocket had been stitched shut after tearing on a job site, and a faded smear of dried paint ran across the back from a weekend spent repainting his daughter's bedroom ceiling. That jacket did not belong in the lobby of the Meridian Grand Hotel in downtown Toronto, and every polished surface in the building seemed designed to remind him of that fact. Marcus stood near the revolving glass doors, holding a leather portfolio that had once been his wife's. The edges were cracked now, the zipper slightly bent, but inside it held 18 months of calculations, structural assessments, and hand-drawn diagrams that represented the most important work of his career. He checked his phone. 8:47 a.m., 13 minutes early. Sophie's bus would not arrive at school for another 20 minutes, and he had already texted Mrs. Grenier next door to confirm she would be there for pickup at 3:15 in case the meeting ran late. Everything was accounted for. Everything except what was about to happen. 32 floors above him, inside the Meridian's private conference suite, executives from Ashcroft Whitfield Properties were gathering around a mahogany table that cost more than Marcus earned in a year. Ashcroft Whitfield was one of the largest commercial real estate developers in Ontario, responsible for towers, transit hubs, and mixed-use complexes across the Greater Toronto Area and into Ottawa. For the past 9 months, their flagship project, a $340 million waterfront development called Lakepoint Commons, had been stalled by a structural engineering crisis that no firm had been able to resolve. Foundation assessments kept failing municipal review, deadlines had been missed, penalties were mounting, investors were nervous. The board was meeting this morning to discuss whether to pause the project entirely, absorb the losses, and move on. What they did not yet know was that the answer to their problem was standing in their lobby, wearing a paint-stained jacket, holding a dead woman's portfolio, and quietly rehearsing under his breath. Before this story unfolds, if you believe that real worth has nothing to do with appearances, that single parents deserve more respect than most people give them, and that character always reveals itself eventually, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who has been underestimated, and subscribe to Integrity Tales for more stories about people who prove the world wrong by simply being who they are. Marcus Beaulieu was 41 years old, and most mornings his body felt closer to 60. His hands were calloused from years of structural engineering fieldwork, not the kind done behind computer screens in glass-walled offices, but the kind done on scaffolding, in excavation pits, and inside half-finished buildings in February cold that could crack your phone screen. He had started his career at a mid-sized firm in Hamilton, worked his way into infrastructure consulting, and earned a quiet reputation among contractors as someone who could look at a problem others had declared unsolvable and find the flaw everyone else had missed. None of that showed on the outside. What showed was the jacket, the steel-toed boots he had forgotten to swap for dress shoes, and a face carrying the particular exhaustion of a man who had not slept through the night in nearly 2 years. His wife Camille had died 22 months earlier, ovarian cancer. Diagnosed late, advanced fast. The medical system moved as quickly as it could, but biology moved faster. She passed on a Tuesday afternoon in April, with Marcus holding her left hand and their 8-year-old daughter Sophie holding her right. The room smelled like hospital soap and cut flowers someone had brought that morning. Since then, Marcus had restructured his entire existence around a single priority, making sure Sophie never felt like she had lost both parents. He turned down a full-time position at a consulting firm because the hours would have meant missing her school concerts. He freelanced instead, taking contracts he could schedule around her life. He learned to braid hair from YouTube videos. He packed lunches that were never quite as good as Camille's but always included a small note folded into the napkin, because Camille used to do that, and Sophie still looked for it every day. Money was not easy. Freelance structural engineering paid well per project, but projects were inconsistent. Camille's treatment had not bankrupted them. They were in Canada after all, but the peripheral costs had accumulated. Time off work, travel to specialists in Toronto, medications not fully covered. A second opinion in Montreal that insurance did not recognize. The house in Burlington was still mortgaged. The savings account had a balance that made Marcus check it less often just to avoid the feeling. His truck, a 2006 GMC Sierra with 310,000 kilometers on it, had belonged to his father-in-law, who had given it to Camille and Marcus as a wedding gift 12 years ago. The transmission groaned. The heater worked on its own schedule. The passenger seat had a stain from when Sophie spilled an entire thermos of hot chocolate during a snowstorm on the QEW last winter. The back seat, her booster seat, sat beside a tattered copy of Charlotte's Web and a small stuffed fox named Patrice that she refused to leave home without but always forgot in the truck. That truck had carried lumber, drywall, survey equipment, a grieving child, and the invisible weight of a life rebuilt one careful decision at a time. It was not a vehicle, it was a system. This morning, Marcus had parked it in the only available spot near the Meridian Grand's east entrance because the parking garage was full, and he could not afford the valet. That decision would cost him more than he could have imagined. Inside the hotel, on the mezzanine level, Victoria Ashcroft was reviewing her phone with the practiced intensity of someone who believed efficiency was a personality trait. At 51, Victoria was the CEO of Ashcroft Whitfield Properties, and the third generation of Ashcrofts to lead the company. She had inherited it from her father, expanded it aggressively, and earned a reputation in Toronto's development world as someone whose standards were absolute and whose patience was decorative at best. She wore a charcoal suit cut so precisely it seemed engineered rather than tailored. Her hair was pulled back, her heels were silent on the marble, which somehow made her presence louder. She walked with the posture of someone who had never once been told to wait. At 8:52 a.m., Victoria passed the east entrance on her way to the elevator. Through the glass, she noticed the GMC Sierra parked along the curb, its rust-edged wheel wells, its cracked windshield, its faded bumper sticker from a campground in Algonquin Park, all of it registered in a single glance. She stopped. She turned to the hotel's front-of-house manager, a slim man in a dark suit whose name tag read Philip. "What is that vehicle doing at our entrance?" Philip looked. "I'm not sure, Ms. Ashcroft, possibly a guest or a delivery." "It's not a delivery vehicle, it's an eyesore. I have 12 board members arriving in the next 20 minutes, and the first thing they'll see is a truck that looks like it was rescued from a scrapyard. Have it removed." Philip hesitated. "We could ask the owner to relocate. I didn't ask for a conversation, I asked for it to be removed. Call the city, call a towing service, I don't care, just make it disappear before my board walks in." Philip nodded once and reached for his phone. Victoria continued to the elevator without looking back. By 9:04 a.m., a flatbed from a private towing company had arrived. By 9:08 the Sierra was hooked, lifted, and rolling away from the Meridian Grand's polished entrance. A small stuffed fox named Patrice watched through the back window as the building shrank behind her. Marcus did not see any of it. He was already on the 32nd floor, sitting in a leather chair that made no sound when he shifted, waiting for the meeting to begin. His portfolio was open on the table in front of him. His hands were steady. His boots left faint marks on the carpet that he hoped no one would notice. He had been invited to this meeting by James Fong, Ashcroft Whitfield's VP of Engineering, who had encountered Marcus's work on a municipal bridge reinforcement project in Hamilton the previous year. James had been quietly desperate. Every major firm they had hired to resolve the Lake Point Commons Foundation issue had delivered reports that were either inconclusive or contradictory. James had remembered the bridge project. Remembered how Marcus had identified a subsurface load distribution error that 3 other engineers had missed, and made a phone call. That phone call had led to 4 months of Marcus working nights after Sophie went to bed, reviewing geological surveys, municipal inspection records, and foundation blueprints spread across his kitchen table. He found the problem, miscalculation in the original soil-bearing capacity analysis, compounded by a drainage design flaw that none of the subsequent firms had caught because they had all trusted the original report. The error was subtle, the consequences were not. If Lake Point Commons had been built on that foundation as designed, the structure would have shown settlement cracks within 3 years and potentially catastrophic shifting within a decade. Marcus had not only identified the flaw but designed a corrective foundation system that could be implemented without starting from scratch. It would save the project, it would save hundreds of millions of dollars, it would save the company's reputation. All of this was inside the cracked leather portfolio sitting on the mahogany table. The boardroom filled gradually. 12 people took their seats. Most wore suits that made Marcus's jacket feel heavier. No one introduced themselves to him. James Fong gave him a small nod from across the table, a quiet acknowledgement that carried more warmth than anything else in the room. Victoria Ashcroft entered last. She sat at the head of the table without greeting anyone specifically, opened a leather-bound notebook, and said, "Let's begin." The first 40 minutes were financial, loss projections, investor communications, legal exposure, penalty timeline. Numbers were staggering, and Marcus could see the tension building in the room with each slide. One board member rubbed his temples, another kept glancing at her phone. The mood was not just serious, it was funereal. These were people preparing to announce the death of their most important project. Then James Fong spoke. "Before we discuss termination, I'd like the board to hear from someone." Marcus Beaulieu has been reviewing the Lake Point Foundation issue independently for the past 4 months. I believe he's found something none of our contracted firms identified. Several heads turned. Victoria looked at Marcus for the first time. Her eyes moved from his face to his jacket to his boots and back. Her expression did not change, but something behind it did. A calculation, a categorization, a kind that happens instantly and unconsciously in people who have spent decades equating appearance with credibility. "Go ahead," she said. The tone was not hostile, it was worse, it was indifferent. Marcus opened the portfolio. He did not begin with pleasantries or credentials, he began with the soil. The original bearing capacity analysis for the Lake Point site used Terzegh's equation with assumed parameters for glacial till. The assumed cohesion value was 75 kilopascal. Actual cohesion, based on 3 independent borehole samples I reviewed from the municipal archive, is closer to 42 kilopascals. That single discrepancy changes the allowable bearing pressure by nearly 40%. Silence, he continued. He pulled out cross-sectional diagrams he had drawn by hand, not because he lacked software, but because hand-drawing forced him to think through every line. He explained how the drainage design created a hydrostatic pressure condition that would accelerate differential settlement. He showed where the original engineers had used outdated Canadian Foundation Engineering Manual guidelines, instead of the 2023 revisions. He walked through his corrective design, a modified deep foundation system using helical piles that could be installed within the existing excavation footprint. He spoke for 22 minutes. No slides, no projector. Just paper, precision, and a voice that never once reached for drama but never needed to. By the 10-minute mark, 2 board members had leaned forward. By 15 minutes, Victoria Ashcroft had uncrossed her arms. By 20 minutes the room had undergone a transformation so complete it was almost physical. The funereal atmosphere had evaporated. In its place was something Marcus recognized from job sites, the energy that fills a space when people realize a disaster can be averted. Questions came quickly. What's the timeline for implementation? 14 to 18 weeks, depending on pile rig availability. Cost estimate for the corrective system, approximately $4.2 million. Compared to the $340 million project budget, that's just over 1%. And this addresses the municipal review failures completely. I've already drafted a preliminary response to the city's structural review board. Corrective design exceeds current code requirements by a margin of 12%. More silence, the productive kind. A board member named Catherine Hartley, who had barely spoken all morning, leaned forward and asked the question that changed the room's chemistry entirely. "Mr. Beaulieu, who else has seen this analysis?" Marcus paused. "No one, I've been working independently." Catherine turned to James Fong. "James, is this exclusive to us right now?" James nodded. "Marcus hasn't presented this to anyone else." Catherine looked around the table. The implication was clear. If Marcus walked out of this room and offered his analysis to a competitor, to an investor group, to the city itself, Ashcroft Whitfield's leverage would collapse. He was not just holding a solution, he was holding the only solution, and he was sitting there in a paint-stained jacket with no agent, no lawyer, and no apparent awareness of the power that gave him. Victoria Ashcroft recognized it immediately. For the first time all morning she looked at Marcus not as a freelancer brought in by her VP but as someone whose absence from the room would be catastrophic. "Mr. Beaulieu," she said, her tone entirely different now, "we'd like to discuss a long-term consulting arrangement, exclusively." Marcus nodded slowly. "I'm open to that conversation, but I should mention, I'll need to leave by 2:30 today. My daughter's school finishes at 3:15 and my neighbor is covering pickup, but I promised Sophie I'd be there myself." A few board members exchanged glances, not judgmental, recalibrating. "Of course," Victoria said, "we can schedule a follow-up for—" "There's one other thing," Marcus said, and something in his voice shifted. Not anger, not confrontation, just a quiet firmness that made the room pay closer attention. "My truck was parked outside the east entrance this morning. I came downstairs during the break about an hour ago to check on something and it was gone. Building security told me it had been towed at the request of your team." The room went still. Marcus continued, his voice steady. "That truck is how I get my daughter to school, it's how I get to job sites. Her car seat is in the back, her favorite stuffed animal is in the back seat. I've been trying to reach the towing company, but they're not answering." He was not performing, he was not leveraging. He was simply stating facts in the same precise methodical tone he had used to explain soil cohesion values minutes earlier, and that made it worse. Every head in the room turned toward Victoria Ashcroft. She did not move immediately. Her face went through a sequence of expressions that anyone watching closely could read like a time-lapse. Confusion, then recognition, then the slow, devastating arrival of understanding. The truck at the entrance. the one she had ordered removed without checking. The one she had called an eyesore. It belonged to the man who had just single-handedly saved her company's most important project. The boardroom had been quiet before. This was different. This was the silence that fills a space when a group of intelligent people collectively realize they are witnessing a leadership failure so perfectly symbolic it could be taught in business schools. Catherine Hartley stood. "I'll handle this." She stepped out of the room, phone already to her ear. James Fong looked at Victoria with an expression that was carefully neutral but unmistakably pointed. A younger board member named Priya Kapoor pulled out her phone and began searching for the towing company's direct line. Victoria remained seated. For a woman who controlled billion-dollar developments and managed rooms full of executives with effortless authority, she looked in that moment remarkably small. Marcus waited. Not with anger, not with smugness, with the patience of a man who had learned, through grief and single parenthood and 310,000 kilometers of a groaning GMC Sierra, that most problems resolved themselves if you stayed calm long enough. 8 minutes later, Catherine returned. "The truck's been located, it's at an impound lot on Lake Shore. I've sent a car to retrieve it, it'll be back within 40 minutes. Thank you," Marcus said. Victoria stood, the room watched her. She walked to Marcus's end of the table. Not quickly, not slowly, with the deliberate pace of someone who understood that the next 30 seconds would define how 12 people remembered her for a very long time. "Mr. Beaulieu." She stopped. For a moment the polished composure cracked, and what showed underneath was not the CEO of Ashcroft Whitfield Properties but a person confronting a mistake she could not delegate, restructure, or spin. "I ordered your truck towed this morning. I didn't check who it belonged to, I didn't ask. I saw a vehicle that didn't match my expectations for this building, and I had it removed. That was wrong, not a misstep, not a miscommunication, wrong, and I'm sorry." The room held its breath. Marcus looked at her, studied her face the way he studied foundation drawings, carefully looking for what was underneath the surface. "I appreciate that," he said, sincerely. He did not say it was fine, he did not say it didn't matter. I did not offer her the easy absolution that would have let everyone in the room exhale and move on. He simply accepted the apology for what it was, an acknowledgement of harm, and let it sit there with its full weight. Victoria returned to her seat. She did not look diminished exactly, but something had shifted in the room's architecture of power, not because Marcus had demanded anything. He hadn't, but because everyone present understood what had just been revealed, a pattern of judgment so automatic, so deeply embedded, that the CEO of a major corporation had nearly destroyed a critical business relationship because a truck had rust on its wheel wells. The meeting continued for another 90 minutes, but the dynamic had fundamentally changed. Board members addressed Marcus directly. They asked about his background, his experience, his availability. They treated him not as a hired consultant but as someone whose judgment the company could not afford to lose. At 2:15 p.m., Marcus excused himself. 3 board members walked him to the elevator. Not out of ceremony, out of something more honest than that. Catherine Hartley shook his hand and said, "My father drove a truck like yours, a Chevy, not a GMC, but same era, same rust pattern. He was a millwright in Sudbury, smartest man I've ever known." Marcus smiled. "Amiel. My wife. She used to say the truck had more character than most people we knew." "She was right," Catherine said. In the lobby, Philip, the front-of-house manager, was standing near the east entrance with an expression that suggested he had spent the last 2 hours contemplating career changes. Marcus's Sierra was parked exactly where he had left it that morning, washed, with a full tank of gas he had not asked for. He climbed in, checked the back seat. Patrice the Fox was still there, wedged between the booster seat and Sophie's copy of Charlotte's Web. The stuffed animal's black bead eyes stared up at him with the vacant sincerity of something that had been loved almost to pieces. Marcus pulled out of the Meridian Grand's entrance and merged onto Front Street. The truck's heater clicked on without being asked, which it did sometimes. An electrical gremlin that Marcus had stopped trying to fix because honestly it was helpful more often than not. He turned north toward the Gardiner, then west toward Burlington. The city moved past in its usual pattern of glass and concrete, as construction cranes and the distant silver line of the lake. At 3:09 p.m., he pulled into the parking lot of Frontenac Public School. Mrs. Grenier's Corolla was there, but Marcus had made it, he had promised. Sophie came through the double doors at 3:17, backpack dragging from one shoulder, a piece of construction paper in her free hand covered in what appeared to be a crayon drawing of a purple whale. She saw the truck and her face opened up with the unguarded happiness that only 8-year-olds and golden retrievers can produce without self-consciousness. She climbed into the back seat, buckled herself in with practiced efficiency, and handed him the drawing. "That's a whale," she said, in case he was wondering. "I can see that." It's for Maymon's wall. Marcus looked at the drawing. Camille's wall was a section of Sophie's bedroom where they pinned every piece of art Sophie made. It had started as a small collage near the window. It now covered most of the north wall and was beginning to creep toward the ceiling. She'd love it, Marcus said. I know, Sophie said with the total confidence of a child who has not yet learned to doubt whether the people she loves are still listening. Marcus put the truck in gear. The transmission groaned. The heater clicked off, then on again. Patrice the fox toppled sideways into a granola bar wrapper. 3 weeks later, Marcus signed a 2-year consulting contract with Ashcroft Whitfield Properties. The value of the agreement was more than he had earned in the previous 6 years of freelance work combined. He paid off the remaining mortgage. He opened an RSC for Sophie that would cover any university in the country. He replaced the Sierra's transmission, repaired the heater wiring, and fixed the cracked windshield. He did not buy a new truck. When James Fong asked him why, Marcus thought about it for a moment and said, "My father-in-law gave us that truck the day Camille and I got married." Sophie learned to say truck before she learned to say house. Some things carry more history than you can put a price on. Within Ashcroft Whitfield, the story spread, not as gossip, as something closer to institutional memory. The details shifted slightly with each telling. The truck got older, the jacket got more ragged, the amount saved grew rounder, but the core remained the same. A CEO had judged a man by what he drove. That man turned out to be the only person capable of saving her company's most important project, and when he had every reason to walk away, he stayed. Not because he needed to prove anything, because he had a daughter to pick up at 3:15 and a job to finish. Months later, Victoria Ashcroft quietly implemented a new company policy. No visitor, contractor or consultant would be subjected to appearance-based judgment on any Ashcroft Whitfield property. The policy was posted in every lobby, printed in every contractor welcome package, and included in every employee orientation. It did not mention Marcus by name, it did not need to, and every morning a 2006 GMC Sierra with 310,000 kilometers and climbing pulled out of a driveway in Burlington, Ontario, carrying an engineer, a booster seat, a battered copy of Charlotte's Web, and a small stuffed fox named Patrice who had seen better days, but was not going anywhere. If this story reminded you of someone who has been overlooked, underestimated, or judged before they were known, comment, "Character has no price tag." Share this with a person who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Integrity Tales for more stories about people whose worth was never about what they wore, what they drove, or what anyone expected them to be.